In speaking about campsite selection, there are a few things you want to keep in mind. The first one is whether or not there are what I call widowmakers around. And these are different types of things that basically could fall on you or hurt you in some way. So if you're in an area where you see a lot of downed trees or trees that are dying or things that are making a lot of noise because you think they might break, this is a dangerous area to set up and obviously a place that you should avoid. The second thing you want to look out for are wigglies. And by wigglies, I mean things that could crawl all over you that are harmful. When you sleep out in the middle of nature, you're going to have to get used to the occasional ant crawling on you. But what I normally do when I get to a nice campsite, I think anywho, is I'll kind of bury my hands in the ground for just a moment and see if anything ends up crawling onto me. Out here in sort of this high desert environment, mostly I'm looking for what are called piss ants. And they smell a bit like turpentine when crushed, but they also bite you. So that's a good way to test for them. But I'm looking for other wigglies, you know, spider nests, or if I see a scorpion or something like that, I probably just won't camp there. So we have widowmakers, wigglies. For resources, I'm looking to see if in my general camping area, if there's plenty of wood to build my shelter and supplies that go with that, the pine needles and the dried leaves and such for my insulation, if that's nearby so I don't have to walk too far to access these materials. And then of course for my campfire. I'm also looking to see if there's water nearby. Now, where we've set up for this video, we actually don't have running water or a well or a marshy area or pond or anything right here, so we've brought water in, which makes this thus a good place to camp, and it's fine. But I normally would not suggest camping anywhere if you're too far off of water, because as we know, it is a critical component of our priorities of survival. So water is another really good one. And then the last thing to consider is weather. What's happening with the weather? You know, what direction is the wind coming from? Which way should I build my shelter? If precipitation comes, where is it going to be, you know, aiming at? And what kind of natural protection is already around? These trees right here are giving me natural coverage along with the shelter that I've built. And also, you know, with kind of where I decide to set up, I'm looking for things that are helpful but not necessarily necessary, like flat ground. It's much easier to sleep on flat ground than it is to sleep on a hill. However, you should be putting insulation underneath you to stay warm, and if you do so, you can create a flat surface. Things like waterways, you know, if you see a dry run that looks like where water will travel if it floods, I certainly wouldn't put my shelter on top of a zone like that. In fact, if I'm not like at a high spot, but sort of in a flat area and I really can't tell where water might run, I may go ahead and dig out a trench around my shelter just to make sure that, you know, if it does collect, that it's going away from my shelter ultimately. So these are some campsite selection considerations. And the last one, which is something that we set up for this film, is to consider rescue. I have a beautiful view of a lot of open sky and the opportunity to see any overpassing planes or helicopters in the area. So this was a nice place to set up. As I've mentioned before, creativity and ingenuity are wonderful things to have when you're out here in the woods and trying to come up with ways of taking care of your priorities of survival. When I came towards this beautiful arched branch, I thought, oh, a dome shelter. There's lots of wood around for me to create my my debris hut on. I thought this was going to be great. There's already duff material on the ground. And then I looked a little harder. So first of all, this tree isn't as stable as I want it to be. It's, you know, I mean, maybe it is kind of stable, but it's kind of dead and dying over on that side. My greatest concern though was that there is a waterway that comes through here, a trench zone. So in any type of flooding that happens, it would be coming right through my shelter space. So I ended up saying no to this spot. But once again, you know, feeling comfortable out here is super important to your ability to stay out here for a long period of time. So if you're somebody who has an eye for design, you come across something like this and it does have all of our campsite selection attributes, you should go for it and make it into something cozy and beautiful, and something that feels good. That said, in an emergency situation where you need to get out of the elements to save yourself, it's interesting that young children are often the best survivors because they have no inhibitions in getting in small spaces where other animals would be and crouching near logs and under debris and getting dirty because they don't think about it in ways of like it being gross or scratchy or whatever. They're trying to get protected and get small and find refuge. So keep that in mind for emergency shelters, and that same thing can hold true for small alcoves and caves, especially in a lot of the slick rock formations that we have in the area.